Hi, James here, and this is part 8 of our tutorial series on the Austco Medicom system. And today's subject is going to be the ANPDs and duty stations. So to create a ANPD annunciator, we go into device table, and first of all, we must create a container for all the ANPDs and duty stations. To create a container, go into new APB device symbol. We're going to use ETH-ANN-1. So ETH means Ethernet, and which means that it's going to be a network Ethernet network device. ANN is the name of the container for Annunciator, and 1 is going to be the node number. So the way we choose node number, port type is UDP. The way we choose the node number is that since the annunciators and duty stations are networked device, conceptually they don't really have a origin node, but we still give them one. And what happens is that when we give it the origin node 1, whichever device that's missing from the network, then there's going to be an error message displayed on this node, which is node 1 in our case. And the IP address, we will choose the first one here because we're using node 1. If you're using node 2, then choose the second one here. Netmasks is always this, and press OK. So this creates the container for the duty stations and annunciators. After we created this container, we will create our first annunciator. So go into new, and we will call it ETH-ANN ANPD rather -1 and -1. This first one means node 1, and the second one means the first annunciator inside node 1. This here is the node number, and buzzer type is the same as the one we've seen in part 6 for the alarm sounds, and you should choose it the same for all your consoles. The example we've used before is UL-STD-1. You can just leave it as default. You can show the clock or not. APB address is going to be the number that's here. So it's the first device in node 1. So it should leave it as 1. IP address is going to be the IP address of the container, 10.2.1, and then here is the number for the device numbers, which is 1 in our case. For message type, you have 4 choices here, and the ANPD can have, if I remember correctly, up to 12 characters displayed. So usually I would choose name 12, and I'm going to show you what exactly I mean by that. So after I press OK here, you've created the first annunciator. And let me show you what I mean by name 12. It's going to call table, and I'll just create a few more, just one call. And inside this call, as you remember, you have name here as the name of the place. So let's say room 101. But you also have these 3 which you can use. The second one has 4 characters in total, maximum. And this here, you should always give them the same name. But usually I don't use 4 and 8 because they are used by older devices. There are some older annunciators that only has 4 characters maximum. And if you're on a site that does not have these older devices, then you never need to use these 2. And if you are using the ANPD, like the one I'm showing you right now, then you should probably use the 12 characters. So let's say that this site has no older annunciators, then I can safely ignore these two fields. But I'm using this field here for the ANPDs. So that was the way to create the annunciator. And let's go back into device table. And next thing, we want to create a duty station. So for the duty station, it's absolutely the same thing as the annunciators. It's exactly the same steps. So if I were to create the duty station first, then I must create the container first. But since I already have a container for node 1, I'm going to go inside here, press new, and give it a symbol, ETH. I'm going to call it ETH duty-1-2. Now, the 2 means the second device on this in this container. So here it's still node 1, but the type use the same. APB address is going to be 2 for the device number. Here it's going to be 10.2.1.2. So it is exactly the same steps as the ANPD annunciators, except that you give it a different name. And you can see that the device is created here. And here's the difference between this and the ANPD annunciators. So you save it under a name. I'll save it under tutorials. And you have to open it using Notepad. Oh, first of all, you close this file under Notepad. And the last thing you've created is always going to be on the bottom. So you're going to have to search for the name of the container. So remember, the name of the container we had was ETH-ANN-1. And after you've created the duty station and annunciator, you can see here in peripherals, the first one is the annunciator, ANPD annunciator, and the second one is our duty station. You can find it with the IP address you gave to your CPS duty station, which is 10.2.1.2. And to make it a duty station, you have to erase this AN-RD. AN-RD represents the name for the duty station for the annunciator, rather. So you have to change it to CPS-duty, and this is how you make it a duty station instead of a annunciator. So save, close this, and we'll open it again. So if you go back here, there isn't any sign here that anything has been changed, but it is a necessary step if you want this device to be a duty station instead of a ANPD annunciator. So after you've created this, you can create more annunciators or duty stations, but you can also create one that is monitored by node 2. So I have to create a new container for that. It's Ethernet ANN-2. Port type is UDP. Origin is going to be 2. So the difference between this container and the previous container is that devices missing in this container is going to be announced from console 2 instead of console 1, and you choose the second one here since this is node 2. So the difference between these two containers again is that if one of these two is missing from the network, it's going to be having an error message on console number 1. And if I haven't created a device here, but let's create a device, Ethernet-ANPD-2 for node number -1. That's the first device of node 2, and this is 1, same as here, 1.3.2.1. Again, I'll use 12. So now you have a second ANPD annunciator, and the difference between this one and this one is that if this one is missing from the network, the error message is going to be displayed on console number 2 because its origin node is node 2. So now that we've created the annunciators and duty stations, I'm going to show you how to make it display all the calls. So let's say that these two should display all the calls from node 1. So I will go into the zone table and create a new zone. I'll call it C-ANN-1 for node 1. And inside this, I'll create a new service. It's going to be S-alarm. And first one, since you created them last, they're going to be on the bottom of this list here. So as you can see, these are the 3 that we created earlier. ANPD 1. So I'll first create this one and then another one. I'll put them for the duty station. So since they are in the same zones, it means that whichever group is associated with this zone is going to be displayed both on the ANPD and the duty station. After you've created the zone, you must bind them. So there are several ways to do that. If you go into the bind table, you can modify what's there by default. So B1 is there by default, and you have whatever's inside group 1. You're going to add it here, add zone, and we're going to add the zone that we just created, Z-ANN-1. After you have that, it means that whatever whatever alarms that is put into group 1 is going to be associated both with Z1, which is there by default, and Z-ANN-1, which is what we've just created. Which means that what calls coming from group 1 is going to be displayed to zone ANN-1, and what's inside zone ANN-1 are the annunciator and the duty station. So that's how you make the annunciator and duty station display those calls. I'm going to create another zone as an example for the second annunciator that we created. So S-alarm, and this is annunciator at node 2, the first annunciator of node 2. And then let's go back into the bind 2 and add the zone, which is the one we just created. Now you have the option to modify these default binds, but usually what I like to do is to not modify those default ones. So I'm going to delete this. So this is back to default, and delete this. This is back to default. And what I like to do is to create my own binds, E-ANN-1, and add group 1 to this, and add this zone, group 2, So what I did here is that I created two new binds. Their input is the same as this one, group 1, group 2 here, group 2 here. And I added these custom ones to my custom binds. The reason why I like to do this is that I don't like modifying what's already there by default. And by adding these two, it's clear to other technicians that there is something modified from the default. So if this wasn't here, then another technician might look at this and they might think that there's nothing out of the ordinary. But if they look at this, they see these two here, then they immediately know that there are some two special binds here. So that's the way I recommend doing this. And that is all for this video.